Jamie, I think you are up.
All right, I'll go ahead and hop in. I want to thank David, Josh, Adam, and Mindy again for really enlightening us around the projects we're working on here as a team and ensuring we're moving everyone together through this crisis moment. I'm proud to introduce our next panel. My name is Jaime Henning. I'm the president and CEO of the Greeley Area Chamber of Commerce. And I have the opportunity to introduce our next topic, climate policy and the Northern Colorado economy. As you all know, energy is incredibly important to Weld County and the entire Northern Colorado region. And it's a key issue for the NCLA group that we're all working with. We're working to protect and support the growth of the traditional energy sector while also discussing innovative alternative energy sectors in Colorado. Joining us today is Will Toor, Executive Director for the Colorado Energy Office, Barb Kirkmeyer, Weld County Commissioner and Senator-elect for District 23, Terry Fankhauser, President and CEO for the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and Dan Haley, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I want to welcome all of our panelists. Thank you for being here and taking time with us today. We're going to go ahead and provide an overview of the greenhouse gas roadmap. And before I introduce Will, I'll frame that out a little bit, but he'll be our first speaker today. The state's objective of meeting the near-term goals of reducing greenhouse gas pollution 26% by 2025 and 50% by 2030 from 2005 levels will be challenging. It will require innovation across several different industries important to Northern Colorado. The Governor's Climate Cabinet and the Colorado Energy Office believe these goals are achievable with existing cost-effective technologies, but will need to continue the transition to renewable energy, significantly expand adoption of electric cars, trucks, and buses, change transportation and land use to reduce the need to drive, expand building efficiency efforts and electrification of buildings, significantly reduce methane pollution from oil and gas production. I know Will's Colorado Energy Office has been busy this year developing the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap to meet some of these goals. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him first to outline that for us, and then we're going to have questions for all of our panelists today who are going to weigh in on these issues. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Will.
Great, thank you very much, and great to be able to join the panel this morning. I'm going to give just a very brief overview of the roadmap. The draft roadmap is out for public comment right now. The comment deadline is actually coming up in 2 days on November 12th. The full document is fairly extensive, about 170-page document, including the technical appendices, but I'll do my best to hit the highlights. Next slide, please. Could I get the next slide, please?
Looks like we may have to go a little off script. I'm not sure if our technology is working with us today.
Well, I'll just
give it a try.
I can just speak to it. There we are.
There we go.
So in 2019, there was a very active year at the legislature on clean energy and climate policy with 13 or 14 different pieces of legislation, depending how you count, in the realm of climate policy, clean energy, electric utility regulation, energy efficiency, and transportation electrification. But one of the most significant pieces of legislation was House Bill 1261, the Climate Action Plan to Reduce Pollution, that for the first time set legislatively adopted goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions that were really aligned with the levels that science tells us are needed in order to have a high probability of being able to maintain a stable climate with temperature increases, average global temperature increases above pre-industrial levels of under 2 degrees centigrade. And those goals are 26% below 2005 levels by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050. In response to the passage of the legislation, the governor asked the Energy Office to work with other agencies in a multi-agency effort to develop a roadmap for how we can achieve these goals going forward. And while the Energy Office led the effort, we worked very closely with CDOT, with the Department of Public Health and Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture. And there's been a pretty extensive public process over the last year with multiple public meetings and many stakeholder engagement meetings. From a emission sources perspective, while there are a wide variety of emission sources, the four largest sources have been relatively consistent over the last couple of decades. Transportation, electricity generation, emissions from the oil and gas supply chain, and emissions from heating buildings. And the biggest change is that electricity has been getting cleaner at a faster rate than the other sectors, so that transportation actually overtook electricity generation in the last couple of years as the largest source of emissions. Next slide, please. So at the same time that the agencies have been working on developing the roadmap, there has been ongoing work, much of it around implementing previous legislation to actually achieve emissions reduction. So we haven't been waiting for the roadmap to take action. Probably the biggest has been the action that is taking place at the utility level. I describe here as utility clean energy plans, but different utilities have different governance models and different mechanisms for adopting their plans. But what we've seen over the last year has been a remarkable activity by multiple utilities to retire older polluting plants and replace them with zero emission wind, solar, and storage. Most notably, Tri-State Generation and Transmission, the second largest utility in the state that provides electricity for most of the rural co-ops, announced their responsible energy plan that involves retiring uneconomic older coal plants and replacing them with primarily wind and solar. Their CEO, Dwayne Hiley, described this as a green dividend that is actually going to allow them to reduce their wholesale energy rates by about 8% over the next couple of years, but because the wind and solar is coming in at costs that are substantially lower than simply the costs of operating their existing plants. Another major focus has been on electrification of transportation. And just a couple of things of note. In 2019, the state adopted a zero emission vehicle standard that requires that auto manufacturers, the vehicles that they sell in Colorado, a certain percentage of them have to be electric or plug-in hybrid or hydrogen vehicles. That percentage grows over time from now through 2025. And notably, for actually the first time on any state in the nation, this was supported by the automobile manufacturing industry. And the final rule that was adopted was actually jointly submitted by CDOT, the Energy Office, and the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and Global Auto Alliance that together represent 99% of the vehicles sold in this country. There's also been action on continuing to adopt more advanced building codes. There's new appliance efficiency standards. And certainly there's been substantial action on continuing to reduce emissions from the oil and gas industry. Next, please. When we modeled out what does this all mean? Where does it take us in terms of emissions? What we see is that we are on a trajectory of reduced pollution over time, but it's not fast enough to actually achieve the state's targets. What we're seeing is that under what I would describe as essentially the current trajectory, the 2019 action scenario in the middle there, we're on track to achieve about half the level of emissions reductions that would be required to meet the 2025 and 2030 targets. So sort of good work happening, but there is more that will need to be done. Next, please. And so, as Jaime mentioned, we see sort of 5 major areas where we are going to need to continue to make progress in order to be able to achieve the 2030 targets. Probably first and foremost is continuing that swift transition from fossil generation, really from legacy coal plants to renewable energy in the electric generating sector. And, based upon the plans that have been adopted by multiple utilities and a few additional plans that we're anticipating in the next year, we think that we are on track to achieve this level of reductions, which is actually an 80% pollution reduction from the utility sector compared to 2005. Another arena that will be important is transportation, continuing to accelerate the transition towards electric vehicles. And that includes not only cars, but over time, trucks and buses. I would note that this summer, the state launched a clean trucking stakeholder process in partnership with the Colorado Motor Carriers Association in order to explore a wide range of potential strategies for helping to clean up trucking. That's very important, not only because of the greenhouse gas emissions, but because they're a major source of both particulates and of nitrogen oxide, which contributes to the ozone problem that we have in the Front Range. Another area that will be important is continuing to accelerate improvements to both building energy efficiency and the electrification of buildings. What we've seen is that there's been substantial technical improvements in electric heat pumps, which is making it more and more practical and cost effective to use electric heat pumps for both water and space heating. Another really important area is reducing methane emissions, and this includes reducing methane emissions from the oil and gas industry, as well as from landfills, sewage treatment plants, and agricultural operations. I would note that with agriculture in particular, there are no recommendations for regulatory approach there. It would be purely incentive-based. So for instance, there might be incentives for utilities to use what's known as renewable natural gas, biomethane, that could help create a market for things like methane capture from dairy farms. There is a recommendation for regulatory action in terms of the oil and gas industry. And in particular, the analysis suggested that emissions reductions of around 50% compared to 2005 levels should be possible by 2030. And the State Air Division is initiating a stakeholder engagement process to look at a potential rulemaking later in 2021. When we look out to 2050, the focus of the roadmap is primarily in what we should be doing today to reach the near-term targets, but it certainly becomes clear that all sectors will have a very important role to play to reach the 2050 goals. Final slide, please. And for folks who are interested in reading more about this, the entire draft roadmap is available on the Energy Office website, along with you can see the comments that we have received, all of the substantive comments. You can submit comments through November 12th through the website or emailing them to climatechange@state.co.us. And after the roadmap is finalized, there will be many opportunities to engage in particular implementation aspects of the roadmap. And many of those will, although not all, will happen through the Air Quality Control Commission, and you can get updates from the Air Pollution Control Division if you're interested in staying connected with those. And that's a quick summary.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Will. I want to go ahead and make sure, I'm going to come back to you with some questions here at the end, but I want to make sure to be able to offer our energy sector partners some contrasting opinions on the issues at hand and an ability to speak to those. And so I'm actually going to turn to Dan Haley next and ask him, what has the industry already done to meet these goals? I know in working with industry sector partners, they do talk about that often. And also, how will the climate change agenda and the pieces that Will's outlined outlined impact oil and gas production in Colorado. So if I can turn that over to you, Dan.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. I think the previous panel I was on and listened, and you heard and saw the importance of oil and natural gas, particularly to the Larimer Weld region and to the entire state. And so I think when we proceed down these types of paths, we need to do so cautiously, and we need to do so thinking about impacts to all Coloradans, not just to an industry per se, but to all of us in this state. And as you noted, there have been great gains made in this industry already. According to data at the Regional Air Quality Council for the non-attainment area, emissions of volatile organic compounds, those VOCs, have gone down by more than 50%, while production has quadrupled in Colorado over the past 10 years. So we're already seeing gains done out there through technology and innovation. I think it's important to note that we share in many ways the state's vision of lowering greenhouse gas emissions. But we think in order to achieve the right policy prescription or to achieve the right goals, it should involve a big tent approach that includes not just oil and gas, but other industries, other organizations, state officials, all coming to the table to figure out how we can do this in a cost-effective manner that benefits all Coloradans. And as you noted, this industry has been out front with some pretty aggressive measures to decrease emissions of methane, other pollutants. Our producers began adopting new technologies, low-emitting designs several years ago, before they're required, including things like infrared camera inspections, on-site emissions monitoring, reducing the number of tanks that are storage tanks at well pads. And so that's brought those numbers down, those emission numbers down. How do you take now those gains and perhaps encourage more? How can you incentivize that? You heard Mr. Toor talking about incentives in other industries. Rather than top-down regulations, we would encourage state agencies to consider sort of those innovative greenhouse gas reduction strategies that prioritize innovation, incentives, flexibility. I think the first step would be a stakeholder process to identify possible emission reduction innovations that are happening out in the field, something that gives operators some flexibility to select a mix of strategies to help meet the challenges and produce those sort of, to help them meet their share of the emissions reductions. And I think as an industry of geologists, engineers, scientists, we are well suited to meet this challenge head on and produce some cost-effective strategies for consideration. Whether that's new tank controls, pipeline management, non-emitting pneumatics, utilization of electric drill rigs, pumps, closed loop systems, things like carbon capture are becoming more popular. All those different strategies are out there, but not all tools and technologies are universally appropriate, which is something else I think is important. So I hope when we walk through this process, the state understands that results matter more than regulations. By setting those performance-based standards, not mandating the use of specific technologies, we can really accelerate innovation and allow industry to succeed in ways that strengthens the economy and also protects the environment. And just one other question that you had, if I can just add one final point here. This industry is producing molecules cleaner, better, and safer than most anywhere in the country. And if you have policies, well-intentioned or not, that begin to limit that local energy supply, you then begin increasing imports, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, and you're having the exact opposite effect of what you're trying to do. If you're trying to help a global issue through climate change, you need this product produced in Colorado, and you don't want us relying on this product being produced in countries that don't have the same environmental standards. Sorry, long answer to your question, Jamie.
No, thank you so much. I'll come back at the end here with a question for all of you. Appreciate your comments on the industry and the potential impacts, right, and moving ahead. I'm going to take it also a little closer to home here in Weld County and ask Barb Kirkmeyer, who I believe is on as well, if she could elaborate on what types of programs has Weld County implemented. I know Dan alluded to that as well, some of the changes in the industry to address climate change, and what are the anticipated costs of these strategies? How are you moving forward in those ways? So I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Barb if she's on. Not sure if I have Barb on.
She's on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to unmute me or if you guys, if Ann was going to do that. And so within Weld County, you know, we work very diligently with the oil and gas industry. And since 2007, the industry has spent quite a bit of dollars in our county to ensure that they are dealing with the air quality issues. And, you know, we've gone after and over the course of the last couple of years, hired our own air quality experts. And at one point even offered to the state that we would help them pay for things. So at this point, we are starting to put in new monitoring stations, again, working with the state so that we can truly identify what's going on in Weld County, how it's impacting, if it is impacting anyone else or any other area of the state. And, you know, what we're doing to help eliminate any, you know, problems with the air quality. So that's part of it. But, you know, I'd like to kind of add on to what Dan was talking about a little bit and how this climate change agenda is impacting all Coloradoans. And I'm greatly concerned about the impact to those disproportionately impacted communities and citizens in the state of Colorado. The lower income population and rural Colorado, how are they going to be negatively impacted with this greenhouse gas roadmap? I mean, goals are nice. It's great. I mean, and I think we all can say that we share in the vision of reducing greenhouse gas emission. But what is severely lacking in this plan is basically that companion piece. You know, when local governments, whether it's transportation, water, or sewer infrastructure, when we put that together, we also put together the companion piece on that, on how much is our infrastructure going to cost? And what does that mean to our families? You know, the working poor, the people who can't afford to have increased water bills, or in this case, increased electrification bills. I don't know about you, but back in 2010, you know, we had the whole clean energy economy plan put forward by Governor Ritter. And we were told then it wasn't going to cost you more money. Don't worry about it, consumers. We're going to take care of you. Well, you know what? We were left out in the cold, basically, with that plan. And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm a member of an REA, and my bill went up. I spend about $300 a month, and I'm a single family dwelling, basically. I'm the only person in my home. I spend about $300 a month trying to make sure that I can heat my home. So, you know, there's a lot that goes on here, and I've asked Will Toor several times, where's the companion piece? Where is it? What is the capability of the infrastructure that we have in place? Who's done that study? Where is that at? What are the costs? Because we know it's not just going to be in hundreds of thousands. It will probably be in billions of dollars, the cost to build out the infrastructure. First, the transmission lines that are needed to carry all this electricity to get to a 90% reduction by 2050. There's no plan that says, here's the transmission lines and the capability and capacity that is needed to get to that. There's nothing that says, here's how much it's going to cost to you as the individual to get that to your home. You know, nobody's talking about that. We're not talking about how is this going to negatively impact our households and what are we going to do about that? I mean, again, you know, we all share a vision. I testified in support of the clean energy economy back in 2010. Took a lot of criticism for it. But at the same time, understand that we've got to have clean air. That's extremely important to everybody. But at the same time, we've got to have some fairness in what this is going to cost our consumers and our businesses to be able to have this and try and meet this lofty goal that the legislature just put together. And we really don't know what it's based on. I mean, the 2005 number, is it a 2010 number? I mean, what are we trying to actually reduce here? And where is the plan for how we're going to deal with making sure that our consumers can afford this and that we're not disproportionately impacting our low income population and our low income households? Because I don't know if y'all realize it or not, but I checked on the state demographer site and there's about 1 million households in this state of Colorado that have less than a $50,000 annual income. So we need to start putting together the rest of the plan before we set out to just go off on our way and say we're going to get to this 30, 50, 90% reduction.
That actually leads me into my next question. Thank you for that, Barb.
Sure.
And that is back to Will. Will, is there legislation you intend to pursue? And then as a follow-up to that, back to Barb, as you head into the state legislature in January, what are some of the priorities associated with these reductions that you intend to pursue? So to Will first, is there legislation you intend to pursue? And then back to Barb, as you head into office, let us know maybe what you're thinking for the future. So Will, we'll turn it over to you next.
So right now, the agenda that is laid out in the roadmap, there are a set of near-term action recommendations. many of which could be pursued either legislatively or through sort of existing rulemaking authority. And I think it'll sort of shake out in the next months or so which ones that may move forward in legislation and which ones might move forward through rulemaking. I would say if you look at the roadmap, there are a number of proposals in the building energy efficiency space around expanding the energy efficiency programs that natural gas distribution utilities offer, expanding some of the programs that electric utilities offer to support things like heat pumps for their customers, as well as the potential of creating incentives for use of renewable natural gas. Those are things that could move through Public Utilities Commission. You potentially could imagine legislative strategies. At this point, I don't think that there are decisions made about exactly how those would move forward. In addition, there are a number of recommendations in the transportation arena that, again, I think could move forward administratively, or someone might propose legislation on, that it includes setting greenhouse gas pollution standards in the transportation sector, as well as exploring opportunities for additional investment to support the infrastructure that we're going to need for both light and heavy duty electrification.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you then, maybe Barb, for again your opinion on what you'd like to move forward and see out of that.
Yeah, and thanks. And basically what I want to say is, oh, come on, Will, we already know there's an electrification bill that's out there that people have already been working on with regard to introducing it as soon as January of this next year. So, and we also know that there's conversations and bills that are being looked at to be introduced with regard to land use and eliminating natural gas to homes and making everybody rely on electrification and electricity, which will probably just exacerbate the affordable housing issue that's going on in many of our communities across the state. So there's a lot of legislation that's out there that's been proposed. They were talking about it last year, had things proposed last year. They're just going to continue on, they meaning the Democrat side of this, and Will knows that. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to act like it's just going to be done through rulemaking, but there probably will be a lot of rulemaking that takes place as well. The things that I'm going to work on when this comes up and where I can help out is basically, how are we going to make sure that it's fair to all consumers, that we aren't disproportionately impacting our low income areas or our rural areas of the state of Colorado, because that's the part that I am extremely concerned about. Again, it's nice to have lofty goals. I think everybody shares in the vision that we need to reduce greenhouse gas. What we don't all share in is that it's, oh, we're just going to trust us and it's not going to cost us more money at the consumer rate or at the consumer household, or me as a family, or my children as families, or anybody at that point. So I'm going to look at and require that, you know what, there needs to be the companion piece. There needs to be the study about how are we going to increase our capabilities and our capacity in electrification in this state. It's not just as simple as waving a magic wand. And I just want to make sure that no matter what plan we put forward and what rules we put forward, that we're not essentially going to leave people in the dark and have rolling brownouts or blackouts like they are in California. Because unlike California, in Colorado, we have a lot of snow here, and we don't want to leave people in the cold and make them get to a point where they're trying to decide between heating their homes or putting food on the table.
I'm actually going to end with a question that yeah, go ahead, Will, if you ever.
Oh, I just wanted to note on the electric side that I think that from the state agency perspective, we very much share the sense that both affordability and reliability are extremely important. And the decisions that are made about the resource mixes are made by each individual utility, some through their city councils of their municipal utilities, through the Public Utilities Commission for the investor-owned utilities. Decisions are made by the co-op board for tri-state. And what we're seeing is that in each case, there's very careful consideration of affordability and reliability. That's really why we're on the pathway that we are on, which is not towards 100% zero carbon by 2030 for some utilities, it's quite deep. Platte River Power Association recently adopted a plan to get to about a 90% reduction by 2030 while maintaining affordable, reliable electricity. Tri-State, came up with a plan that will reduce in-state emissions by 90% while reducing electric rates by 8%. So what we're seeing is that in practice, because the costs of wind and solar have come down so much and are lower costs to build new wind and solar than to operate existing coal plants, that the economics is really very well aligned to allow substantial pollution reduction from electricity generation, all without jeopardizing reliability or affordability.
So Will, on your final comment, I want to offer an opportunity maybe for Dan, Barb, and then yourself to give comment on this final question, and also on the last, if there's something you'd like to add. The roadmap mentions meeting these goals will diversify and strengthen our economy. It will create good paying local jobs. Can you expand on how this looks in terms of actual projections and how jobs from current sectors could be transferred to other industries? I know that's a hot topic. I'll go ahead and start with you, Dan, because you may have wanted to comment on the last, then Barb, and then Will, and then I think we're going to have to wrap today. So one final question to you all. Dan, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
I'm not sure I understood the question fully, but I don't believe the jobs are transferable. I don't think you're going to create renewable jobs that pay and have the impact that the oil and gas jobs do. And I want to make a point about California. As we watch policies imported from California, let's look and see what the impact is in California. Their production has decreased. Oil and gas production has decreased. Their fuel costs and their home heating costs are up. And so it's important to watch what's happening and see the practical implications of that. I also want to talk about trade-offs briefly. All energy has trade-offs. And that's the discussion we should be having. I appreciate the need for more electric vehicles, but to create a 1,000-pound electric battery takes 500,000 pounds of raw materials that's resourced from some other place on Earth, and I can't imagine that is done without emissions. So what are we trading off here by trying to limit fossil fuels, by trying to limit natural gas? It's important that we have these discussions. To create photovoltaic cells, to create wind turbines, you need oil and gas. Again, a product that we should be producing and should want to produce here in Colorado under these very tough standards that have been developed by the state, under the innovation and technology that's been happening out in the field. I feel like we've got a good story to tell. Natural gas is reducing our emissions. We're meeting environmental benchmarks. Other economies across the world, they belong to the Kyoto Protocol. They belong to the Paris Agreement. They're not doing the same things that we're doing here with free market innovation, with the tough rules that we have here in Colorado. I think we've got a good story to tell. I want to make sure when we walk down this path that we're doing it smartly, that we're talking about trade-offs, and we're talking about all Coloradans in this process. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for representing the industry. Barb, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you next, and then finally Will, and then we'll get back to our next programming. So Barb, your turn.
All right, well, thank you. And I'm not sure what the question was at this point, so I'm just going to say one more comment. And here's the part in Weld County that we didn't understand, and I tried to express this I think I got 2 minutes at the public hearing to talk about our concerns with regard to the roadmap. But here's the part that we don't truly understand is that the roadmap for transforming our economy in pursuit of greenhouse gas emission reductions is based on a single proprietary model. We don't understand why the firm that was contracted and engaged, that their model wasn't validated or peer reviewed. And we don't understand why, or, it's not that we don't understand, but why isn't the roadmap, we believe it's deserving of a more robust analysis of additional alternatives, as Dan was talking about, using other proven non-proprietary models. I think there are some great disruptions. There are some great inequities here in this plan that's been put forward. And I think it's nice to talk about the new technologies that have been put in place with regard to wind and solar. There's new technologies with regard to oil and gas. That's great. We all rely on those and we want those. But the reality is that new technology and that it's cost, it's going to be less cost to the consumer, that no one has proved that up. And I've been asking for at least the last 6 months, where's the plan? Where is the proof that shows that our consumers, that those disproportionately low-income communities, that rural Colorado isn't going to have to bear the brunt of this once again, because the state has these great ideas and these lofty goals that they can't prove up.
Thanks, Barb, for your comments as well. Looks like we have U.S. Senator Michael Bennet on the line, so I'll leave it back to you, Will, for just some brief final comments, and then we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Sandra.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I think I would just leave it that clearly there's a wide variety of perspectives on the best way to move forward. I do think that it is a really sort of wonderful thing that there's as much consensus as there is on the goals that I think I'm hearing everybody saying that we want to work together to reduce pollution going forward, and would just invite everybody to remain engaged in the process. While the comment period on the roadmap will wrap up in a couple of days, the roadmap doesn't magically make anything happen. Anything that moves forward is going to move forward through administrative, regulatory, or legislative proposals going forward. And we would love to keep up the dialogue and remain engaged as we move towards actual implementation. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate everyone participating in our
Thank you.
panel today, and want to continue to ask everyone to voice, again, the importance of the energy sector to the Northern Colorado region. I'd like to go ahead and turn it back over to Sandra. Thanks for joining us today, everyone.